You are listening to episode 41 of the Psychotherapist Podcast. I am your psycho host, Malcolm Clancy, and I will of course be speaking with my therapist co-host, Doc Bob. Unfortunately, we will not have a part 2 for this episode. The audio came out corrupted, unlistenable, terrible, and I would never torture you poor people like that. However, we still have a jam-packed, truly psycho, and I mean psycho episode for you guys today. We psychoanalyze the furry phenomenon and how George Lucas is probably to blame for it, and he set up the LGBTQ community as a misdirect for his evil. I transitioned to being a moose live on the show. We talk about Amazon's Rings of Power series and how just terrific it was. We talk about the Velvet Underground, and I share a story about the Roman Emperor Diocletian and how his one visit to Rome was his last. All that and more on this episode of the Psychotherapist Podcast. If you're watching along on the YouTubes, I should just note that if you have any kind of fear of mascots, anything like that, you may want to avoid actually watching the episode and just listen along. I hope you guys enjoy. God bless. Psycho bless. Peace. Let's see.
You get going, I'll get us started here.
Alright, the mic is hot.
Okay. So we're about to start podcast number whatever.
Yeah, I lost. It's like 40 something if we actually release it.
Okay, let me start us off with a Buddhist beat. Okay. Special stone right in the middle of that sort of dulled the sound down so it didn't go as long.
Nice.
Experimenting with different sounds.
Yeah.
So do you want to encapsulate what we've been talking about? It was very interesting.
Yeah, so we've been talking, well, welcome to the podcast first, everyone.
Yes, welcome.
And before we jump into that, do you want to just set up like a quick agenda before we start going, or do you want to just jump into...
Well, I said just go with it. This is pretty good because it kind of rolls with what I was thinking earlier this morning. So I guess you'd say you started out talking about seeing a very bizarre video.
And I'm not actually being totally facetious when I say I was unsettled by it. Like, just having these, like I was saying, well, let me just explain to our audience. We were talking about furries.
Okay.
And furries are people who, I guess, identify as like costumed animals, like mascots. They dress up in these, you don't see any, human part of them. And some of them literally act like animals.
Okay.
And this whole conversation stemmed from this very disturbing video I saw this week of Blair White reacting to all these TikTok videos of these furry people, and
No, I didn't know who Blair White was, so can you tell the audience who she is?
You kind of have to be in the weeds of this whole like podcasting stuff probably to have even heard of her, but she's a trans woman who I think talks about like LGBTQ stuff a lot. I don't follow her channel closely. I think she's one of those people who's very like conscious of like the accusations of grooming and stuff and making sure like that gets called out from, an unimpeachable position, even though people will still bash and trash her and like whatever. Like, I don't want to get into it, but apparently there's all these little sub-wars within like trans and feminism, and I guess TERF is like a trans feminist ally, but it's a derogatory term or something. I don't know. But anyway, this furry thing, I wonder if that's just where society has been heading, because I've joked, like I said to you, I've joked with friends that the next thing you know, we're going to have trans animal rights.
Yep.
Where now I'm Malcolm the Moose, and you have to address me, like as a moose and pet my antlers or whatever,
And I would be Bob the Bear. I'd probably stay away from you, right?
Yeah, we probably would fight a lot.
Right. I would think so.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing too, if they ever go like safari style, like role playing as like predator and prey. I kind of doubt any of these people are that athletic. Just a suspicion, but who knows? I feel like that could have been pretty rad, but
Right.
half of this stuff, like, it is sexual and some of it's just not at all, and it's all very bizarre and confusing. And I'll just put, if I have time, a few just snapshots of this video and the people talking in it, so you can see how creepy some of these costumes are. Some of them are kind of like whatever mascots, but others,
Okay.
they have like their own moving mouths and stuff, and it's just, there was there was this one poor kid who was terrified of mascots, and he booked a hotel unknowingly that was having a furry convention. So there's this clip of him like freaking out, being like, they're everywhere, they're everywhere.
How freaky is
So
that?
anxiety, so much anxiety, you know. And it's a very bizarre mix, but you know, like, at what point seriously is a college professor gonna have to like have student walk in, you know, dressed like Ronnie the Rat and like
Right.
demand cheese or whatever? And it's like, at what point do you say, I respect your identity and you're not hurting people presumably, and I don't care, but at what point is it like, why are you coercing all of society to play in your little game? You know what I mean? I think there's for some of them, a degree of narcissism, because I think part of it is rooted in wanting to have a very outlandish identity. You know what I mean?
So it probably is really an identity issue. And I'm here to say what's the genesis of this? Where's this coming from?
Who knows?
The whole trans movement, the identity issues.
Well, you know, like I mentioned before, I think it's something that's probably been around for a few decades. Just because like I said, I remember as a little kid seeing some crime show, you know, they did an episode on it or whatever. And yeah, it's just...
In that crime show, what was it that imprinted in your brain?
Well, I think because I was young and because...
To be clinical here for a moment, yeah.
No, let's do it. Because I think part of it was because I was young and it was just so outlandish and like creepy to me that it kind of just stuck, you know?
Was it the imagery that was creepy?
Yeah, it was just, I remember a room full of a bunch of like mascots, like, I don't really remember at all what they were doing, but they were like making weird little creepy, like, you know, gestures and stuff the way mascots do. And I think in that episode it was supposed to be like an orgy or something. I don't know.
Okay.
It wasn't like an R-rated thing or anything. It was like CSI or one of those kind of shows.
Okay.
But, you know, then this video pops up of Blair White reacting to this stuff, and it kind of terrifies me, to be honest. I've seen a lot of like bizarre TikToks of like trans people or non-binary people, and it's like, yeah, that's someone, if I go out on the street in the city or whatever, I'll see someone like that every here and then, so it's not like that outlandish to me. I never walk around, except for Keytar Bear, but he's a goddamn hero. You know Keytar Bear?
No, tell me.
Local legend. So when I used to take the train in and walk from South Station to my office, every now and then there was a guy and a bear mascot playing a keytar. It's like a keyboard, but you hold it like a guitar, and it's
Right.
strapped around your shoulder or whatever. So he's Keytar Bear, and he just plays and makes people happy. And you know, maybe we should track that guy down and see if he identifies as a furry.
Is he good? Is his music good?
Yeah, Brian's my mood. And I wonder, maybe in his case it could also be, because I wonder with some of them if it's like an introvert, I just want to be anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, have you ever heard of Buckethead?
Nope.
He's a musician who wears this mask and literally wears a KFC bucket on his head.
No, this is really entertaining today.
Yeah.
Because I've not heard of any of these people.
Yeah, so, I mean, with Buckethead, his whole point is like, it doesn't matter what I look like, you know what I mean? And with some, like, artists, like, Slipknot that wear all masks. Maybe it's
Right.
just because they're metal and they want to look scary or whatever. But you know, it is interesting because I remember in the very brief time I was doing a little bit of acting for my friends' films or whatever, I was always way more comfortable if I was in a character that was like fully hooded and masked and weird, so I could just like, I don't know, get into the whatever character. If I was playing someone who was like me, I felt like on the spot, or if I was like, you know,
Interesting.
yeah, because you feel more anonymous, you know, so maybe that provides some comfort. I don't know.
So you throw on a little stage paint and a couple of accoutrements, and you feel more comfortable getting into some kind of
Character, yeah. Well, it's not like I had a bunch of lines or anything and whatever, so, you know, but it is an interesting dynamic to take it back to this furry thing, because on the one hand, I feel like it's a lot of weirdos and introverts and people who's like, you know, maybe these people are just really ugly and that's why they need to wear the, you know, furry helmets or whatever. So they're kind of like wearing a bag on their head all day. But
that's an interesting theory.
But at the same time, there's definitely some of these people who are just starving for attention and probably are on TikTok all day and talking about, you know, wanting to talk to little kids about this shit. And I remember one TikTok video of fully dressed furry just pounces through a door and the text just says, "What would you do if I came into your house in the middle of the night?" And I'm like, why would you put out a video like that? What do you think the response is going to be? I'm going to take a gun and I'm going to put it in my mouth and blow myself away so I don't have to look at your stupid fucking furry costume again.
Right.
That's what's going to happen, you know?
Right.
So I just
So you're going to turn it around, instead of blowing that person's brains out, you're going to blow your own out, right?
I think that would just...
You turn a homicidal gesture into a suicidal one, Malcolm.
Well, I just saw that... Well, it's funny just because
you get on that road today?
I'll explain. I saw that clip and I just had in my mind at the time just like a visual skit, because the obvious thing is to pull a gun out and shoot. That's my first reaction.
Right.
But then I just had a mental image of my person acting like such a silly furry and having such a blank, just eye-rolling look at my face. And just so like, because some of this stuff is like the cringiest shit you'll ever see in your life. So it just makes you, sometimes there's things that are so cringy, you just want to die from that person's embarrassment.
Spontaneously, what's the cringiest thing you've ever seen? Visual image.
Nothing really comes to mind right now. I would just say this furry stuff because I don't really thirst after cringe content. I mean, I saw a random funny video this week of like scenes from the Lord of the Rings of like orcs just having like totally normal voices. So it's just like, hey, knife the scum, whatever.
Yeah,
so it's like very intentionally awkward. So I don't know. I guess the cringiest thing I've seen recently besides that is the Rings of Power, the Amazon Jeff Bezos monstrosity where they spent $1 billion on a fucking show that looks like crap, awful characters, no story, just it's a fucking disaster. Which we were all kind of hoping for anyway.
Okay, and so this is the new show that's out now, the new Amazon.
Yeah, they just put out the season finale yesterday.
Okay.
And it's very interesting to look at some of these characters because I almost wonder if it's just projections of the writer, because the main character, who is supposed to be this badass female elf warrior who's basically Wonder Woman, she's a total narcissist, you know. She only thinks about...
Is she an elf or is she Wonder Woman?
Sorry, what?
Is she an elf or is she Wonder Woman?
Well, she's an elf technically, but the way they did it in the show, she's so stupidly powerful that she can just fight anything, and you know, it's almost like a Marvel movie where there's just no almost tension because the character's just so stupidly overpowered and nothing can touch her.
Is she sexualized, like sexy, like Wonder Woman?
No, I would say there's really low to no sexuality in this series whatsoever. There's like, even the romance is just terrible, and it's just all just, ugh, you know, but, I'm sorry, what was your question?
I think you answered it. I mean, I was asking, about you mentioned, she's a Wonder Woman and an elf, and I said, well, is she a sexy?
No, she's in dude armor.
Okay.
Basically, she's, the big bad commander of the North, whatever, and everyone's just in awe of everything she does, and she can just get locked up in a prison and then just throw 5 guards in the prison with one hand and lock the door behind her, and just like, okay. It's so stupid. And this chick, I saw a great video fucking breaking down, because it's one of the things where it's like, the more you slow the series down, the more I realize how fucking ridiculous and stupid it is, where this chick is literally walking into a pyroclastic surge. Do you know what that is? From when a volcano explodes? No. So in Pompeii, people were like frozen where they died and they were just instantly vaporized. That was from a giant cloud of ash that just comes from the volcano. So it's not even the lava that gets them. It's almost this giant, super hot. In the show, buildings are fucking spontaneously combusting before they even get hit by it. But this chick just walks through and it's like, yeah, I'm fine.
What percentage of people do you think are you're very interested in that whole genre? It's not something that I, like my whole life, even as a kid, I wasn't a big Marvel comic kind of person, Superman, none of that stuff, but a good percentage of the population is into it. Maybe more so now, I think.
Well, I think it ties a little bit into this sort of infantilization and perpetuated like childhood and stuff. Okay. That, kind of ties, I think, into the furries or whatever. But, I never personally was into like comic books and Marvel and superheroes so much, but I was into like sort of fantasy, like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and Star Wars and stuff like that.
Yeah, so Star Wars sort of really broke the barrier.
I think that's when like nerds over time stopped being like a derogatory term and people just kind of embraced it.
Right. Maybe
that was the beginning of the end, and the whole maybe that's where the furry thing ultimately stemmed from, was there's a term called LARPing. It's live action role playing.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, so it's people dressing up in costumes and shit, and maybe normalizing that more than the trans people. Maybe George Lucas is to blame ultimately for these furries that 10 years from now are going to be running for office.
Right. Is LARPing was big like a few years back. You'd watch some of these half-hour comedy shows, and some of the nerdy scientific types would be talking about LARPing.
Right.
And I haven't heard much of it until you mentioned it this morning.
Yeah.
Is it something that's still big?
I can only assume so. I don't know. I don't really follow like Comic-Con conventions and stuff like that, but I assume that audience has only just gotten steadily bigger over time.
Right. It hasn't diminished.
No, certainly not. And
hasn't hit its peak yet.
Sports are dying. They're all going woke or whatever. Yeah. So, it's kind of like the culture's just slowly decaying.
Yeah. So the market's getting bigger for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and part of the Rings of Power, it also just, I think, it's so emblematic of, like, because part of their motivations in putting it, and if you look at the sort of behind-the-scenes interviews and stuff, it's always like, we have such a diverse cast, we have so many female characters who are so strong and powerful, and then you watch the show and, like, one of them literally does nothing but witness other things men do.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, we have the first black female dwarf of color. This is what everyone has been waiting for. And it's just like, ugh, And none of that stuff I even really like. It's a fantasy world, so I think it's silly for people to like care if there's a Puerto Rican elf or whatever. But like, ultimately the point should be to have a good story and good characters and like. And they say we want to be loyal to the sort of Tolkien lore and stuff, but I don't really know much about it, but from some videos I've seen, apparently they have just completely ignored it and made shit up and butchered it, so.
I had mentioned to you Todd Browning's Freaks last week or the week before. Did you ever look it up?
I think it was last week, and I forgot about it.
It was, I was a minor. My minor was film, and I took a fair amount of film courses in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Film history, and you watch a lot of movies and stuff. But that was like, because it came out of the 20s or 30s, it's shocking, But they showed it was real life. It was really filmed with circus freaks.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what made it even freakier to watch it. But this morning, I'm listening to the show from UMass I listen to every Saturday, and the featured person this morning, featured group person, was Nico, who was the blonde, they called her Chanteuse, in the group Velvet Underground. And this is 1967. And the Velvet Underground was Andy Warhol's composition of a rock group. And they were amazing. They had,
So
you say something?
Yeah, so you're saying Andy Warhol said, I'm going to pick you, your Velvet Underground. That's how they got formed?
Exactly.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I want a mix of people,
Right.
So they had transvestites, they had bisexuals, weird people. They had this gorgeous woman, Nico, who people didn't know if it was a transvestite or a real woman, but it was a real woman.
Mm-hmm.
And they were playing it there. I'm thinking, at the time, that was shocking to a lot of people. And even the cover of the album, he had the Velvet Underground was a controversial cover, but that was going to be his splash into pop art and rock art and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they played at a club called Club 54 in New York, and the music was incredible. Lou Reed was, in the group. He was probably the most well-known. But, those people, they were real people. They didn't put on costumes. They didn't portray something they weren't. They were just what they were.
Yeah.
And, I'm thinking, that had to be, at the time, it was shocking to a lot of people. A lot of people thought this is crazy. And a lot of the stuff had to do with drugs, a lot of songs about drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Heroin was one of the biggest songs, Lou Reed's song. And in concert on stage, he would, I saw him at the music hall, and he grabbed one of the stage curtains, the things that they hold it up and wrapped it down, strapped himself up, and imitated shooting himself up. But they were incredible. The music was amazing.
Yeah.
And, you think, wow, this was real stuff.
Yeah, man. I think there's just, I think weirdos and art and creativity and coolness just all kind of go together really well.
Yeah.
But it kind of blows my mind to try to think about people from like the 40s and 50s seeing that stuff, and then those same people seeing today's furries and they have the kid trans, the cross-dressers, drag shows for kids, and stuff, and they would probably all just nuke the country or something.
Exactly.
Before we get there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just want to share a quick story and then cut to a new tape. But I've been, over the last few months plodding through the History of Rome podcast. And I'm around the late 200s, early 300s. And there was this really...
Rome show that they did on HBO?
No, this was a podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Mike Duncan's podcast where he did the entire history from the founding to the fall of the Western Empire.
Wow.
Yeah, so... there was a period where I'm trying to think of the country it would be today, but it's basically right across the Adriatic from Italy in that like sort of Eastern Europe part. Mm-hmm. At the time, back in the day, it was called Illyria, and there was a period where, I've heard it described as like the West Virginia of the Roman world, which I find hilarious, but they were, the emperors in charge for a while. So they weren't all necessarily people who were born in Rome or like grew up in the city or whatever. And there was one of them who was one of the sort of top emperors ever named Diocletian. And he had never set foot in the city, like when he was emperor or whatever. So eventually he comes to the city and it's like, oh my God, the emperor is finally coming to the city. We got to have a big thing. We're going to put on the games. We're going to make, this the real big shows, whatever. We're gonna have fun, it's gonna be awesome. Then Diocletian shows up and he's walking through the streets of Rome and he sees all the debauchery and orgies and obsessions with games and drunkenness and people ODing in the street. And he was so disgusted by it all that he left the city early. He was just like, get me the fuck out of here as soon as possible, because this is a decadent cesspool. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at in our culture.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Can we take a natural break?
Yeah, let's do it.
Only because I have to do a quick text to someone, okay?
All right.